We've all heard the legend of an ancient, abandoned underwater city, a deep-sea relic of a once mighty and powerful civilization, known for its cutting-edge technology and vast assortment of riches and treasure. It's been told through media since the dawn of storytelling, through cave art and lost language, through paintings and sculptures, through tapestry and weaving, through books and scrolls, through film and television, and every digital media since. Its legitimacy has been argued by scholars and historians for eons, attempted to be proven real by adventurers, collectors, and geographists through missions both extraordinary and deadly. It has pushed experts and amateurs alike to their limits, pressing us all to the boundary of fact and fiction, folklore and fairytale, fiction and nonfiction. It has no answer, only an infinite ledger of questions, all reverberating through the chambers of both optimism and pessimism. Without a doubt, the question that rules them all asks one simple thing: did Atlantis really exist? To answer the unanswerable, one must first delve into the question of what. What is Atlantis? Followed by the question of where. If Atlantis existed, where in the world could one find it? Like the thousands of explorers and enthusiasts before us, we'll take a similar journey to answer these musings and put forth our best effort into doing what no one has been able to do to this day, to find the lost empire and bring truth and justice to the legacy of Atlantis. Now, before we dive into the fascinating topic of Atlantis, we'd like to say a special thank you to this video's sponsor, Magellan TV, the best source for the hottest and most intriguing true crime content available online. You know about their curated documentaries and bingeable television shows, and how they go above the realm of true crime to deliver unbelievable deep dives into other topics, such as space or history or the supernatural. In other words, there is always something to watch, no matter where your interests lay. This week, we actually want to venture away from creepy content to highlight the nature-focused documentary Antarctica, a 51-minute film giving us a never-before-seen inspection of one of the most desolate and unexplored places on Earth. The production takes you across Antarctica's infinite ice deserts, canvassing the rough terrain to photograph the beautiful landscapes, the unique wildlife, and showcase the land's imminent danger. It's a brilliant mixture of science and adventure, while never becoming too boring or plain. We love it because it does justice, explaining a mysterious topic like it's more than just any old enigma, exactly how we create our own videos on Top 5s. Antarctica is also a new release, part of Magellan TV's 15 to 20 hours of brand new content they will add to their library each week, always leaving fans of all things creepy and other relevant topics with something fresh to binge and enjoy. So stop waiting, use the link in the description to access a 3-month trial, and jump into the wondrous exploration of Antarctica and other top-notch documentaries. You won't regret it. The first mention of the Lost Empire came over 2,000 years ago, circa 360 BC, in one of the many dialogues given by the Greek philosopher Plato, called Timaeus. Timaeus is told through the perspectives of a fictional philosopher called Timaeus of Locri, engaging in conversation with Socrates, Hermocrates, and Critias. While most of the dialogue comes in the form of monologue performed by Timaeus, it engages all four men in a debate about the creation of the world, ancient civilizations, and the potential involvement of a demiurge. At one point, Socrates chimes in with a question regarding perfect societies, referencing another work by Plato titled Republic, and looks for examples from the other men. In response, Hermocrates suggests Critias share his own account of a potential discovery of such a place. Critias obliges, deciding to tell the tale of Solon, an Athenian statesman and lawmaker, and his journey to Egypt. It was on this escapade through Egypt, Critias continues, that Solon heard the passing legend of a city named Atlantis. Plato wrote, "Once upon a time your state stayed the course of a mighty host, which starting from a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean, was insolently advancing to attack the whole of Europe and Asia to boot. For the ocean there was at that time navigable, for in front of the mouth which you Greeks call the Pillars of Heracles, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together, and it was possible for travellers of that time to cross from it to the other islands. and from the islands to the whole of the continent over against them which encompasses that veritable ocean. For all that we have here, lying within the mouth of which we speak, is evidently a haven, having a narrow entrance, but that yonder is a real ocean, and the land surrounding it may most rightly be called, in the fullest and truest sense, a continent. Now in this island of Atlantis, there existed a confederation of kings of great and marvellous power, which held sway over all the island, and over many other islands and parts of the continent. These stories of Atlantis didn't end with Timaeus, however. Plato carried the legacy over into his second dialogue of the Timaeus trilogy, called Critias, named after the man who told the initial tale of Atlantis. In Critias, our titular protagonist dives deeper into the role of Hellenic gods played during the early years of civilization. He reveals these Greek deities came together centuries ago and decided to split up the land amongst themselves. When it came time to award Poseidon his part of the land, he was honoured with the island of Atlantis. Critias revealed here that Atlantis was once bigger than a combined ancient Libya and Asia Minor, or modern-day Turkey. Apparently ancient Egyptians recalled the island as a mountainous region to the north and down along the shores, forming an oblong shape in the southern regions, while doubling as a border around Atlantis' Great Plains and inner islands. During Critias' same monologue, Plato wrote a metaphorical story regarding Poseidon and his heirs. In this folklore, Poseidon married Clito, and the couple bore 5 pairs of twins, all boys. The oldest of them all, Atlas, was given the tallest mountain on Atlantis. He was made ruler of the island, and all of the oceans that surrounded the gods, called the Atlantic Ocean. On this mountain, overlooking Atlantis, Poseidon then carved out a palace. To protect the divine structure, he surrounded the mountain with 3 moats, all of increasing sizes, and separated them with proportional pieces of land. To enhance transportation to and from the mountain, Poseidon instructed native Atlanteans to build a network of bridges extending north from the mountain. This gave access to anyone and everyone else on Atlantis, and connected the gods to the people. Critias dove even deeper into the Atlantean infrastructure, detailing a canal that connected the inner islands of Atlantis to the exterior sea, as well as tunnel systems between the rings of rock and land in the island's centre, so that boats could travel freely around Atlantis' mountain and dock along the moat's walls. In addition, Atlantis fortified itself with a series of towers and connected gates, all featuring heavy security fastened with guards. These guards helped patrol the walls that would also protect the inner rings of Atlantis, built from multicoloured rocks, extracted from the moats and garnished with orichalcum, tin and brass. Not everything was easy going on Atlantis, however. In Critias, the titular character evoked times of war some 9,000 years before the events of the dialogue. He talked about a conflict at the Strait of Gibraltar, right outside the Pillars of Hercules, where Atlanteans were conquering large sections of land. The Atlantean Empire had already taken over the legions of Libya within the Pillars of Hercules, stretching their rule towards Egypt in one direction and up through Tyrrhena in the other, a region of ancient Europe constituting a majority of modern-day Italy. Through these conquests, the Atlantean Empire took control of civilizations and converted many of the conquered to slaves to work under their rule. Not all nations in Europe approved of the Atlantean Empire, however. Eventually, a band of Athenian resistors formed an alliance and rebelled against Atlantis. The Athenian alliance lost most of its members, but not before they were able to take down the upper commands of Atlantis and liberate the occupied Atlantean sections of Europe. Soon after, the Athenian-Atlantean wars subsided. Atlantis met its ultimate demise, Critias said in his famous monologue. But afterwards, there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea, for which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by subsidence on the island, and thus the rest is the stuff of legends and lore. Plato never wrote about Atlantis to such a degree again, and the subject wasn't addressed by philosophers for years. That being said, there was another Greek historiographer and chronicler named Halanchius of Lesbos, who had written something entitled Atlantis 50 to 100 years before Plato's dialogues, centering on the lives and lineages of the daughters of Atlas and granddaughters of Poseidon. It is unknown if this work was what inspired Plato's own musings. However, historians have pointed out stylistic similarities between Plato's writing and Halanchius' writing. While Halanchius' writing is about the genealogy of Greek gods, Plato could have been inspired by the title to name his own deity-riddled metaphor. Researchers also ponder the possibility that Halanchius took the title of his work from previous writings about the Atlantis Plato detailed in Timaeus and Critias. However, the connection between the two men's work is the subject of much debate, and awaits further clues to their place in the history of Atlantis' origin. It did not take long for the idea of Atlantis to plant the seeds in the minds of writers all across the globe, who have slowly but surely spun the story of the Atlantean Empire into a much larger-than-life tale, if it wasn't one already. Building the images and iconography of Atlantis, you have probably read and watched about the lost continent in the last 100 years. The first person to conjure a more deeply woven story for Atlantis was actually none other than Plato himself. Technically, Plato didn't add anything new to his iteration of the lost continent. However, he did attempt to factualize his metaphor by later telling his followers that he had actually heard of the story of Atlantis from Solon, who is included in the Timaeus and Critias dialogues. According to Plato, Solon had heard of the legend from Egyptian priests who had been passing the story down via oral tradition across countless generations. Solon then attempted to document the legend via writing for the first time, constructing a partial poem that Plato said would rival the works of Homer. Unfortunately, Solon never completed this poem, and the writings were thought to be lost, or to some, never existed in the first place. It's generally agreed upon by scholars that Plato fabricated the backstory simply to add credence to the original metaphor. In the 3rd century AD, a philosopher by the name of Zoticus wrote the first known adaptation of the Atlantis legend to highly fantasize the people of the lost continent as an ultra-sized superhumans of twice the normal build, fulfilling an army of more than 10 million. Many initial reactions to the Zoticus work bought the story as a real version of Atlantis, still rooted in potential truth. Others have since pointed out Zoticus's past criticisms of ancient philosophy and consider his 2 dialogues, Uspers and Machimos, to be parodies of Atlantis, meant to mock Plato's musings. It wasn't until the 17th century AD where writers began painting Atlantis as either a utopia or a dystopia, taking the idea of a military-centered civilization and turning it into a paradise of heaven or hell. Francis Bacon published New Atlantis in 1687, detailing the idealistic civilization that once existed off the coast of West Africa called Atlantis. 60 years later, Thomas Hayrick wrote the satirical poem called The New Atlantis in 1687, imagining Atlantis as a floating island, either by an ocean or in the sky, but unknown to the rest of humanity. A satirical poem of much darker origins came another 20 years later in 1709, when Dalla River Manley wrote The New Atlantises, detailing a fictional Mediterranean island wrought with violence and political exploitation. 200 years later, as socialism became a much more debated philosophy and popularized in the East, Russian writers were narrating Atlantis as a futuristic and socialistic civilization who had learned of the secrets regarding immortality but sacrificed most of their morality. Another major work to shift the shape of Atlantis came in Boston, Massachusetts in 1915 by Albert Armstrong Manship, called The Ancient of Atlantis. The work shared gospels of Atlantean wisdoms, including a narrative of Atlantean life and training, a narrative about teachings in morality, and a narrative set in the present about a chosen one who is reincarnated on Earth as a child and meant to finally share the wisdom with the real world. One of the most influential Atlantean adaptations came out of Spain in 1877, called La Antida and written by Jacint Verdaguer. It covers the story of Hercules' travels eastward after the sinking of Atlantis, his founding of the city of Barcelona and return westward. Prior to its destruction, Atlantis had been a civilized power that brought the first civilizations to Europe thousands of years ago. Concurrently, it enslaved the European people and became one of the strongest tyrannical rules in the history of mankind. Its ultimate destruction, as carried out by fate, left the one utopia turned colonizer a desolate place, and it eventually sank into the ocean off the coast of Europe. However, because of its influence on the rest of the world, its vanishing forced all of humanity into an unbalanced state. Jacint was said to have been inspired by an epic tale Christopher Columbus was told by a shipwrecker mariner who had suggested Columbus call the New World into existence to readdress the balance of the old. This of course helped renew the obsession with Atlantis, as a genesis to the Mayan and Aztec civilizations and modern-day humankind. As the acceptance of Atlantis as a metaphor grew, more writers and scholars wrote about Atlantis as a lost land and a symbol for the obsession with the past, the obsession with the unobtainable, and the fallacy that yesterday was always better than the present. These adaptations also led to more epic narratives tackling the idea of Atlantis as a fictional utopia, with advanced and futuristic technology that ranged from flying ships to time travel abilities. The late 19th century saw Frederick Tennyson's Atlantis, a story about the discovery of Atlantean ruins and old scrolls that detail the island's former domination, which led to the founding of ancient Mediterranean civilizations. This inspired many adventurers and scholars alike to spend more resources on searching for the resting place of Atlantis. In James Lowe Dryden's 1925 epic titled Mona, Queen of Lost Atlantis, an idyllic re-embodiment of long-forgotten history, Atlantis is described as a former haven for spiritualists and spiritual leaders throughout ancient history, with its ruins discovered by a wandering psychic. This inspired the belief that Atlantis was the birthplace of modern-day religion, or at least contained a spiritual wonder full of godlike beings and the descendants of deities as first proposed by Plato. Throughout all of these literary adaptations, new fantasies and folktales were included, depending on who was retelling the tale. This is where Atlantis was expanded beyond being just a military-dominant nation, but rather an idealistic continent. It's when you first start hearing about Atlantis as a nation of agricultural geniuses, of magical fishermen, or architectural influences, and overall, the perfect society. If Atlantis had only remained a metaphor, it would have never entered the public consciousness like it has in modern times, and explorers from all corners of the globe wouldn't have embarked on century-long excursions to attempt and discover the real-world Atlantis. The way people understand and analyze Atlantis has been a highly contested effort for millennia, dating all the way back to the weeks and months that followed Plato's publishing of Timaeus and Critias, and their impending publicity by other Greek philosophers. Writers from the same ancient period as Plato, somewhere between 350 and 300 BC, were split on the factual basis of Atlantis. Some believed right away it was nothing more than a myth meant to provide an example for Plato's musings. Others were not so sure. One notable philosopher, Crantor, who studied under Plato, led the first wave of belief that Atlantis was historically fact, and Plato's writings were undeniable truth. In a since lost commentary on Plato's Timaeus, Crantor wrote that during a journey to Egypt, he heard from fellow visitors around the area that the story of Atlantis was true. There are other reports that Crantor spoke with Egyptian priests himself, who confirmed the legend, along with displays of hieroglyphs that depicted an empirical reign. Crantor's testimonies themselves are highly debated, but the 5th century AD philosopher, Proclus, wrote significant literature about Crantor and Atlantis. He mentioned the talk that Crantor forced the Egyptian folks he communicated with to confirm the Atlantean history oral tradition. Proclus also dived deeper on the geography of Atlantis, claiming the central island consisted of 7 landmasses, with 3 of the largest at the center. Each island represented the ownership of a Greek deity, including Poseidon and Hades. In the geographical discussions, Proclus called out a theoretical writer named Marcellus, who published writings that explored more of the Atlantean world. Unfortunately, Proclus didn't go into detail regarding Marcellus, and modern-day historians have been unable to identify him. Finding Marcellus could be the key in unlocking the truth behind Atlantis as fact or fiction. A few other historians and thinkers, such as Poseidonus, agreed with Crantor as well. These ancient philosophers were the first to apply local geography to theoretical locations of Atlantis. Specifically, they pointed to the mountains on both sides of the Gulf of Laconia as potential pillars of Hercules. A Mediterranean local fits all of Plato's initial descriptions of Atlantean geography. Early Jewish and Christian scholars also spent a significant time hypothesizing the interpretations of Atlantis. One Jewish philosopher by the name of Philo quoted Plato in his writings about world history, believing the fall of Atlantis was indeed caused by ravaging natural disasters. In the Christian sectors of theology, more historians were on the side of mythology. Of course, a lot of the fuel behind these beliefs were from the Christian distaste for paganism, and felt the discussions since Plato's dialogues were carried on by the occult and didn't want to side with pagans on such a major historical talking point. Ancient thinkers also weren't privy to the technology we have now in the sense of geography. While they knew Asia was a large body of land, the idea that Atlantis was of the same size as Libya and Turkey combined didn't seem to faze many. Today we know that a country or continent of that size doesn't exist underneath the ocean, in the Mediterranean or elsewhere. As history evolved into the modern age, so did the interpretations of Atlantis. Many experts analysed Atlantis through the lens of the New World and Eastern obsessions with Mayanism. European travellers traversed across the Atlantic and discovered the Americas, and immediately dreamed up a scenario in which Atlantis was a similar utopia, and that the indigenous peoples of North and South America were in fact descendants of Atlanteans. One dominating line of thought came from renowned geographer Abraham Ortelius, who believed the American continents were once merged as one, and split into 2 before drifting off to sea thousands of years prior. The theory proposed that Atlantis broke off the coast of Spain due to flooding and earthquakes, and that the seaport of Gades, called Cadiz in the present day, was the final remnant of the Atlantean Empire. Maps of the era also depicted the coastlines of the Americas, Europe, and Northern Africa to be pieces of a broken puzzle, and if one were to lump them back together, the borders would conjoin perfectly. From here, pseudo-history truly took over the minds of Atlantean obsessives. In 1516, Sir Thomas More published his fictional work entitled Utopia, which first coined the now popular phrase to describe an enchanted world of luxury and dominance. Utopia was heavily influenced by Plato's writings about Atlantis, and did exactly what modern-day scholars were imagining, that Atlantis somehow connected with the New World across the Atlantic Ocean. This fueled an entirely new line of thinking, specifically that the ruins and leftover architecture of Mayan and Aztec civilizations were actually artifacts left behind by the Atlantean Empire. However, along with these theories came disbelief by Europeans, who did not feel like the indigenous tribes of America had the intellect or power to lead such a powerful empire. Instead, scholars travelled to Mayan ruins and excavated the area in hopes to link the culture with ancient Greek customs. One archaeologist by the name of Heinrich Schnellmann pointed to similarities in both Greek and Mayan languages, forging a narrative that both groups were descendants of a more singular nation. These type of interpretations are truly where Atlantean lore became pure fantasy. The longer people talked about Atlantis, the more far-fetched the theories became. Ignatius Donnelly believed the Bible was a vital text in Atlantean history, claiming the Garden of Eden was a mythological version of Atlantis, and that the Utopia was destroyed by the Great Flood in the Book of Genesis. He also stated that all of modern civilization is a descendant of Atlantis, that their dominion over Europe and Asia was the point in evolution in which culture and military rule split into various forms that have led to the diversity seen in today's world. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a Russian mystic, revolutionized a new way to interpret Atlantis. She called the Atlantean Empire cultural heroes, a drastically different signifier compared to the original writings of Plato, who only referred to Atlanteans as military savants. These thoughts included the idea that Atlantis was the melting pot of racial evolution, and its destruction gave rise to the Caucasian races of modern times. Unfortunately, these interpretations were twisted even further in the early 20th century during the rise of Nazism. Started by Australian journalist Guido von List, the dominating thought depicted Atlantis as a Nordic island filled with superpowered humans that eventually left the destroyed island to create a master race of Caucasians all across the Northern Hemisphere. Luckily, by the mid-20th century, these interpretations were waved off. However, the old theories of lost continents and the Americas representing Atlantis were also forgotten, as continental drift became a widely accepted model of evolution in the 1960s. One of the most modern interpretations of Atlantis comes from Kenneth Feder, an American archaeology scholar. He points to the warning given by Plato in Timaeus regarding the problematic idealism of a naval-based military power. He likened the story of Atlantis to be nothing more than a myth used to teach Plato's understudies, rather than an account of actual history. It's safe to say most modern analytics point to Atlantis as just that, a metaphor lost in translation that captivates the minds of millions, who simply crave to solve mysteries that in reality do not exist. While it has always remained that very mystery, one of the greatest aspects to the lore and legend of Atlantis is the imagination it sparked between artists all across the world. In the 2,500 years since Plato first mentioned the Lost Empire. While we will never be able to see Atlantis with our own eyes, these depictions give us our best glance at what the oceanic world may have looked like. Many of the depictions artists have drawn up display the pre-apocalyptic Atlantis, before it was fractured by shattering earthquakes and swallowed whole by the merciless sea. One of the most famous paintings of the Atlantean glory, however, did show Atlantis at its most vulnerable point. The Fall of Atlantis by the French painter François Demont depicts the lost empire as its leaders fled the incoming waves, its military no match for Mother Nature. A similar painting by Russian painter Nicholas Roerich, called The Last of Atlantis, drew heavy from Nom's piece in 1928. A marvelous city surrounded by mountains falling to the destruction of the ocean. 20 years prior, Roerich's fellow countryman, Leon Bakst, released Terra Antiquus, an ancient city between mountain ranges being destroyed by lightning and crushing tsunamis, overlooked by a mysterious goddess, who may or may not be one of the grandchildren of Poseidon. Two famous sculptures depicting interpretations of the people of Atlantis come from Iceland and Croatia respectively. The first is titled The King of Atlantis, finished between 1919 and 1922 by Icelandic sculptor Einar Jónsson. It resembles the dominating idea that Atlantean royalty were first and foremost military-centric, with the young bulls on either side of the king representing victory in Greek mythology. The second is titled Atlantis from 1946, sculpted by Croatian architect Ivan Mestrovic. Mestrovic was in the middle of a series sculpting figures based on ancient Greeks, and wanted to symbolize the immortality of suffering through war. The woman in the piece is most likely a lone survivor of the wars and misfortunes Atlantis faced at the fall of their empire. Using a similar pessimistic outlet, Belgian sculptor Luc van Soom created the Man of Atlantis, a fountain in the middle of Brussels, Belgium, depicting a half-man, half-fish creature. It was meant to bring awareness to the dangers of global warming and how mankind charted a course set for uninhabited land. One day we will all be underwater and will be forced to adapt to an aquatic existence, a similar warning Plato gave in the deception of Atlantis to begin with. Probably the most unique interpretation of Atlantis through art was American artist Robert Smithson's glass installation called Hypothetical Continent in 1969. The broken glass collage is accompanied by a map drawing of Atlantis, slotting the lost continent right off the coast of Africa and stretching up towards the Mediterranean Sea. Since the story of Atlantis was first popularized by Plato's dialogues, scholars both under his tutelage and outside of the inner circle, both in ancient times and modern day, from Greece to far-out locales around the world, have attempted to find signs of the lost empire's potential existence. For Atlantis to have been a legitimate part of civilization, as well as a geographically sound place on Earth, it most likely was never the size of an actual continent, at least in today's terms. Rather, it most likely was an island off the coast of a Mediterranean country, or perhaps a distant island off the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere between Europe and the Americas. While there haven't been any absolutes discovered in the search of Atlantean remains, explorers of various generations and backgrounds have at least collected a bit of evidence to support their individual theories of the locations that may have once housed Atlantis. Some you may have heard of, but some may surprise you. The nice thing about not knowing the truth of Atlantis is how it makes everything and everywhere a possibility all at once. One of the most popular modern-day locales as the resting spot for Atlantis is the entire Mediterranean Sea, a body of water stretching northwest of Egypt, from Greece all the way eastward to Spain. Among the many landing spots in this stretch is Santorini, also known as the island of Thera. More specifically, the prehistoric city of Akrotiri, now an archaeological dig site, is thought to be a major influence on Plato for Atlantis, if not the outright lost empire itself. Akrotiri was a settlement of the Bronze Age, with evidence of human civilization dating all the way back to 5000 BC. Over 2,000 years, it grew significantly in population and trade, with all the signs pointing to a vast network of relationships with other cultures in the Aegean civilization, leading the way in the all-important copper trade. In around 1600 BC, the town unfortunately fell victim to the eruption of Thera, the active volcano native to the island. Luckily, the thick blanket of volcanic ash that fell over the city preserved much of its infrastructure, leading to a host of revelations in the 1960s, when archaeologists first started its excavation. In the years since, scholars have found various fine pottery and sculptures in the Akrotiri dig sites, including beautifully preserved fresco mural paintings. The excavation also revealed an intricate yet vast drainage system throughout the settlement, as well as paved streets and other details pointing towards a very sophisticated society. There is yet to be the recovery of any human remains during Akrotiri's excavation, but the hope is that one day such a finding will help unlock even more clues into Akrotiri's past and possible connections to Plato's Atlantis. Officially, scholars believe the lack of skeletal remains means the entire city was able to evacuate with time to spare before the worst of Thera's eruption destroyed their city. Where these folks ended up is currently unknown, much like their mythological counterpart. Another popular theory revolves around the island country of Malta being the leftover remains of Atlantis. Malta is known as the dividing line between the east and west sides of the Mediterranean Sea, and would have been a vital trading port throughout ancient history. It also would have been the perfect spot for a military power to rule the open seas, with equal distances to space out its operation across the Mediterranean. Malta is also home to some of the oldest structures in the world built by humans, including massive, megalithic temples, such as the Ganthaja Temple in Gozo, Malta. These temples predate the pyramids of Egypt and play a major role in both local customs and the broader mythology of Maltese lore. Most scholars believe the ancient civilizations of Malta were founded by migrants from Sicily, who were looking to hunt and farm away from other settlements in modern-day Italy. However, it's possible the island was civilized even earlier, but was destroyed and abandoned for centuries before the Sicilians took over. Underneath the depths of the Strait of Gibraltar, a thin strait connecting the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean between the southern Iberian Peninsula and Morocco, rests a submerged island called the Spartel Bank, also referred to as the Majun Bank. The Strait of Gibraltar has long been thought to be the resting place of a sunken Atlantis due to its location and geographical features, most notably the Pillars of Hercules that flank either side of the strait at its entry point. A French geologist by the name of Jacques Collina-Girard first popularized the idea of the sunken Spartel Bank being the ruins of Atlantis in 2001 when he published an essay in a Spanish scientific journal. In the essay, Collina-Girard pointed out that thousands of years ago, at a time when the Earth was at glacier maximum and the ice cap hadn't melted since the most recent ice age, the sea level in Europe was about 135 meters lower than it is today. During that period, the Strait of Gibraltar would have been much narrower and would have featured the Spartel Bank in its center, with the island forming an archipelago of about 12 kilometers across. In around 9400 BC, however, there was a massive sea level rise across the globe due to melting glaciers that put the highest point of Spartel Bank underwater, and eventually over the next 6,000 years, the bank and all of the minor islands surrounding it were underwater. Collina-Girard also proposed a theoretical earthquake followed by a tsunami that led to the submerging of Spartel Bank, around the same time the elevating sea levels took the island by storm. Unfortunately, Collina-Girard's own essay was called out for plagiarism by fellow history investigator Georgios Diaz-Montexano, who discussed a very similar theory. In the years since, both men's theory has been categorized as pseudoscience, mostly due to the timeline of Spartel Bank's existence coming long before the Bronze Age, the time period in which Plato said Atlantis mightily dominated surrounding nations. Of course, when discussing Atlantis and its possible geography in the modern world, one can't go without mentioning the island of Sardinia, one of the 20 regions of Italy and the second largest island in all of the Mediterranean, only after Sicily. Sardinia has a rich history with the Sea People movement of the Late Bronze Age, a time when sea-dominating confederations attacked other settlements across the East Mediterranean regions, including Egypt. These epic maritime feats are thought to be the direct inspiration for Plato's story of Atlantis in the first place, as well as a famous king from the same southern Italy region in 4000 BC named Italos. It's long been thought the name Atlas was first derived from Italos, and his dominant rule near Sardinia gave rise to its people's seafaring military prowess. Sardinia also withholds many topographical traits that are quite similar to the Atlantean geography Plato described in his original dialogues. One such archaic feature on Sardinia is the nurhag, or nuraghi in modern Italian. Nurags are the megalithic edifices built first in the Bronze Age, then more frequently in the Late Bronze Age. While nurhags may appear to be complex military strongholds or royal quarters you'd see in classic depictions of Atlantis, the ruins most likely have no connection to a navy-dominant empire that the Atlantean rule is generally associated with. That being said, only about 70% of the nuraghi ruins are thought to be excavated as of today, with another 30% still unidentified. Some are estimated to be buried underneath thick layers of mud around the island of Sardinia, which, if the tsunami theory regarding Atlantis' demise is true, would explain why so much of the island is covered with mud. Luigi Assai, a Sardinian researcher, believed this to be true. He proposed a theory that Atlantis was indeed submerged, and that the modern-day Sardinia and the island of Corsica are ancient Atlantean plateaus. By charting this theory on a map, it would place the capital of Atlantis on the hill in the town of Sant'Adi. If one were to stand on the top of the Sant'Adi hill, they could then see the circular development of the municipality's construction, mirroring the exact circular development of Atlantis. Sant'Adi is also home to two sources of water, one hot and one cold. It has long been said Poseidon created both a hot and cold water source during the creation of Atlantis, called Acucada and Zynegas respectively. If you do enough research, you can find claims of Atlantis' region on nearly every continent of Earth, and almost every country in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Some make more sense than others, while there are a few that are purely included for the sake of imagination. For centuries, scholars wondered if Plato's idea of Atlantis came from a lost empire somewhere in the Black Sea. They postulate that Solon's quest through Egypt, where he supposedly heard the story from priests, actually occurred in Libya, and Atlantean rule actually occurred in modern-day Turkey. Others believe the ancient city-state called Troy was the birthplace of the Atlantis legend. However, there is still yet to be an explanation of how the bulk of the world's sea economy and merchants from far-off places were able to get to Atlantis' harbour, if it was so far below the worldwide sea level in the ancient Black Sea. A few theories place Atlantis in modern-day Morocco, claiming the fictional island was more like an isolated swath of land between a region called High Atlantis to the north, Anti-Atlantis to the southwest, and the Sea of Atlas to the east. This theory originates from the language of the Amazigh people in modern-day Berbers, an indigenous group in northern Africa who call the plain of Sus Massa and theoretical location of Atlantis Island as it's translated to English. If you leave the Mediterranean Sea, a few locations that spark the curiosity of scholars is the Azores Islands, a Portuguese-affiliated, autonomous region resting 1,500 kilometers from the coast of Portuguese, with ruins and rocks not native to the island's crust itself. Another location is the Canary Islands, thought to be broken up pieces of Atlantis, along with the Azores and Madeira Islands. However, geologists have concluded in their 4 million years of history, these islands have actually never gone through a period of subsidence, meaning they've never actually lost landmass due to fractures in the crust or rising sea levels. Other wayward locations include Great Britain, Ireland and the Irish Sea, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, the Caribbean islands, Brazil, and even Antarctica. It's very possible that if you closed your eyes and put a pencil down on a map of Earth without looking, no matter what the location you randomly selected, would have some sort of clue or footprint somehow related to Atlantis. If anything, the wide range of possible locations speaks to the effectiveness of Plato's metaphor, making it relatable to nearly every civilization on Earth, both before and since. It's why it captured our hearts, our minds, and all of our soul's imagination. Atlantis is not simply a mystery, but a possible key to unlock the stories of our species' history, the consequences of conflict, and our place and purpose on planet Earth at large, making the Lost Empire maybe the most important empire of them all.